Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, January 1st. It is 2025. Happy New Year. Today is episode 461 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. For those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms, appreciate your support. As always, another day, another podcast, the first podcast here of 2025. Hopefully 2025 has better things in store for the New York Jets than what 2024 did, delivering us a brutal 4-12 season with still one more game to go in this miserable season coming up this Sunday against the Dolphins. As we always do, I've been doing these type of episodes the last couple years on New Year's Day. I've got 5 New Year's resolutions for the New York Jets here in 2025 that I want to get into. As always, though, before we get into those New Year's resolutions, we've got to get to our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sports book. For those of you that want to get on any of the college football playoff action, NFL playoffs, NFL Week 18, NBA, NHL, any sporting event that you want to get in on the action betting-wise, check out BetUS and click my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek, if you're looking to get out to Sunday's game against the Dolphins, it looks like it's going to be the Jets against Tyler Huntley and the Dolphins. Check out SeatGeek. If it's your first time buying from SeatGeek, use promo code Bubs on Sports for $20 off your first purchase. Take the price of the ticket, subtract 20 when you use my code. And you know, it's not just for the Jets. It's not just for the NFL. It's for anything. Plays, concerts, shows, anything in entertainment, anything you can buy a ticket for. SeatGeek has it. Promo code Bubs on Sports, $20 off. Also, our friends over at Huga House, if you want any of their awesome selection of hats, check them out. And at checkout, use promo code Bubs for 15% off. And when you use that promo code on your first hat, you will get 30% off your second purchase when you use my promo code Bubs for 15% off any purchase. So check them out and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag here to kick off 2025 and this new year. So here we go. Another episode 461, another day closer to the 2024 season coming to a close. And it's the first day of 2025. So as I've done here the last couple years on this podcast, every year, January 1st, New Year's Day, I always create an episode, couple New Year's resolutions for the New York Jets. So this year, I've got 5 New Year's resolutions for the New York Jets as they come off of a 4-12 season, 4-13, 5-12. We'll see what happens here this week against the Dolphins. But I've got 5 New Year's resolutions for this Jet team, what they need to do in 2025 to hopefully get back on track and have a much more successful 2025 season, and ideally turn what is a complete dumpster fire of an organization, dumpster fire of a culture within the walls of One Jets Drive, do a complete 180 and get some winning in this organization. So number one, this is obvious, but you've got to find your next head coach. You've got to make the right hire at your next head coach and general manager. That's New Year's resolution number one. That's the obvious one. We all know where this team has gone. We all know what's happening right now. We all know the culture, the losing culture, this train wreck. 14 straight years without playoffs, 9 straight losing seasons, which is the 6th longest losing season streak in NFL history, 5 straight seasons of 10 or more losses. I mean, the list goes on and on of the problems with this team, right? You go into this season with high expectations. Aaron Rodgers, here we come, coming off the torn Achilles. We finally got it. This is finally our year. And you're 4-12 and you've completely collapsed, right? Robert Saleh fired middle of the season, 20-36 as a coach, 357 winning percentage. You know, he was fired when the team was 2-3 after their week 5 loss to the Vikings in London. Joe Douglas also got canned, as we all know. He finished 31-68, 313 win percentage. Ugly winning percentage as a general manager. Did some good, but at the end of the day, it's a results-driven business, and there was a lot of swings and misses, both in draft and in free agency, as we all know. He was, of course, fired in week 11 when the team was 3-8. So a team right now that is leaderless, a team right now that has no culture. It's a losing culture. And I think this first New Year's resolution of making the right hire at coach, finding your guy, finding the culture guy, finding the right fit is so important on so many levels. And I think everything else we talk about is just going to trickle down from this head coach, from this general manager, because of where the team's at right now. I've said this many times. I think this is an organization that needs an experienced guy. You can't have a first-time coach come in here. In my opinion, there are some first-time guys out there that, I think could potentially work, but you just don't love the idea of going down the road, even if it's a first-time offensive mind and not a first-time defensive mind. A first-time guy coming here, we've seen it happen time and time again, where they get eaten alive in this market, get eaten alive with this media. It's not a place for learning on the job. It's not. It's a place where you need a proven guy that's been there, done that, has had success in other places, has won games in other places, has set cultures up in other places. That's what this team needs. This hire is so important. The most important hire this organization will probably make since they hired Bill Parcells after the Rich Kotite mess. That's where this team's at. That's how low this franchise is at. They need a legitimate culture change, a guy that's going to step in here day one and gain their respect from the locker room, gain their respect from these young guys, set up his culture, no more of this losing nonsense, have a sense of urgency, accountability, because there's no accountability right now whatsoever in that building. You need a leader. Enough of this social media nonsense. All of this outside stuff's got to go. You need a winner. You need a winning culture. You need accountability. You need guys that are bought in, because the Jets right now have none of that. And they've got to get it right. Because, as I mentioned, none of these other New Year's resolutions that I have, these next four I will talk about, are going to mean anything if they don't get the head coach and the general manager right. When you look at some of the options, right, we've gone down the list a ton, but just to go down the list again, right, Mike Vrabel is a lot of people. He's my top option. I've said it time and time again. You know what Mike Vrabel brings to the table? Brian Flores is another name. I'm just going through a list. This is no particular order. I'm just going through a list of names. Vrabel, Brian Flores, Liam Cohen, Ron Rivera will get an interview on Thursday. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Jesse Minter, Cliff Kingsbury, heck, even Rex Ryan. You want to throw John Gruden in there, you can. Todd Monken. There's a ton of names to consider. We'll see which one eventually lands with the Jets. You even want to throw John Gruden in there as a possible option. Fine. If a Kevin Stefanski or somebody like that gets fired, you want to throw his name into the ring. That's fine. There's a lot of options. They've got to narrow it down to one. We've talked a lot about general managers as well. They've interviewed John Robinson. They've interviewed Thomas Dimitrov. They've interviewed Jim Nagy. You want to go Mike Borgonzi route. Mike Greenberg's an option from Tampa. Obviously, Ray Agnew's an option. Ian Cunningham. There's a ton of different names, ton of different guys that you could consider for the GM opening as well. I think it'll be interesting ultimately what the Jets do. Will they go GM first, head coach first? I think they should go GM first. There's only one exception to that. I think the only guy, in my opinion, that I would let come in here and make the choice at GM would be Mike Vrabel. He would be the only guy. Other than that, if you're hiring an Aaron Glenn, if you're hiring even a Brian Flores, you've got to have the GM first. He's got to like the hire. He's got to choose the hire, and then you hire the coach. But again, the Jets don't do things by the book very often. I think that's even generous. They never do anything really by the book. So who knows what they're going to do. But the fact of the matter is, you've got to get the hire right. Nothing else is going to mean anything. It's going to be a complete disaster if you swing and miss on this hire yet again. You've got the 33rd team, Mike Tannenbaum, Rick Spielman helping. How much of an impact will that have? We'll see. But New Year's resolution number one, find the right head coach, general manager. Ideally, it be guys with experience, but we'll see the route that the New York Jets take. They never cease to really they always seem to find a new way to surprise us. So I wouldn't be surprised at anything at this point with this team. But that's New Year's resolution number one. Number two kind of falls into number one a little bit. And I think a lot of what's going to happen with this player is going to depend on the general manager and the head coach. And again, these New Year's resolutions are in no real particular order. These are kind of just the way I thought of them. You could maybe say they're in order of importance, but they're just 5 I put on paper and I'm reading them in that order. Number two to me is, I guess you can word this a couple different ways, but it's extending Garrett Wilson. It's locking up Garrett Wilson. It's convincing Garrett Wilson to stay. Whatever you want to phrase this, keeping Garrett Wilson around, whatever it is, Garrett Wilson's got to be a Jet long-term. And I think the Jets got to get a deal hammered out this offseason. They've got to make him believe. They've got to make him buy in. They've got to have him trust the vision of this next head coach and next general manager, because I think every Jet fan would agree. While I do think some of Garrett Wilson's future might hinge on whether or not Aaron Rodgers is back, I think a lot of what Garrett Wilson's going to do, a trade request or not, is going to depend on who they hire as a head coach and if he buys into that head coach and if he believes in that head coach's vision. So again, head coach, general manager has a trickle-down effect on everything I'm about to say. But to me, you've got to lock up Garrett Wilson. That's your number two New Year's resolution. You cannot have this get ugly where he's requesting a trade. Get the right coach in here. Hopefully Garrett buys into that coach's plan. Because if you get a proven guy like Vrabel, you get a proven culture guy that has built it up in Tennessee like you in his previous destination, you could see Garrett Wilson staying here and having a legit belief in a guy that's been there and done that. Garrett Wilson needs to be a Jet long-term. You need to extend him. You've got him under team control for the next 3 to 4 years, so he has none of the leverage here, right? You've got him under team control. You've got him locked up. He can request a trade and do whatever he wants. You don't have to trade him, nor should you trade him. But if you hire the right coach and the right general manager and you give him an offer that he can't pass up, there's no reason Garrett Wilson should not be a Jet long-term and should not be happy to be a Jet long-term. 2025, week 1, whether they're home, away, whoever the heck they're playing, Garrett Wilson's got to be out there, ideally with a new contract, ideally with a new buy-in, and a belief in this organization. So that's New Year's resolution number 1. This is a guy that's too good to have this get ugly, where he's requesting trades, unhappy, all that stuff. He's too good of a talent. He cares too much. He got to make him a Jet for life. You look at his numbers this year, 17 games played, or rather 16 games played, one more game left. 97 receptions, 1,053 yards, 10.9 yards per reception, 7 touchdowns. He's tied for 8th in receptions, 15th in yards, tied for 15th in touchdowns. You look at his career numbers, 50 games played, has yet to miss a game in his career yet. 275 receptions, 3,198 yards, 11.6 yards per reception, 14 touchdowns. He had 7 touchdowns in 2022 and 2023 combined. He has already had 7 this season with 1 game left. You give you some other numbers here just to show the history he's made. He's only the 5th player to record 80 receptions and 1,000 yards in each of his first 3 seasons in NFL history. He's also just the first Jet player since George Sawyer in 1966 and 1968 to have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's already put himself among some of the best Jet receivers of all time. He's 3 receptions away from being just the 2nd Jet in team history to have 100 receptions in a season. Only the other one to do that was Brandon Marshall in 2015. And the crazy part is, the quarterback play he's been given, the coaching he's been given, is far from anything you would want to have your number 1 receiver go through. And yet here he is, 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, has remained the only positive consistent, one of the only positive consistents on a team that has been a disaster ever since he's walked into this building in 2022, a part of that historic draft class. Lock him up, make him a Jet long-term, give him a reason to believe. Garrett Wilson needs to be extended And in my eyes, you need to give him a reason to believe here in 2025. And that starts with the coach and GM. He's too good of a player to have him. He's too good of a player for you, too good of a person, too good of a locker room guy to have him requesting trades and wanting out this early in his career. That can't happen. Do whatever it takes to keep him here long term. That's New Year's resolution number 2. All right. Getting a little bit more into the X's and O's here. Number 3 New Year's resolution here for the New York Jets. It's rebuilding the defensive line. I mean, what Joe Douglas did to this defensive line is completely embarrassing. Embarrassing. And I will say this, and I've said this a lot. Out of all the things that have gone wrong in 2024, because there's been a lot has gone wrong. Out of everything that you could be frustrated about from the 2024 New York Jets, I've said this many times, the defensive line might actually be at the top of the list for me, just because of where this unit was a year ago. And all of this defensive line struggles that they're going through right now could have all been so easily avoidable if the general manager didn't screw up. And maybe Woody got in the way with the whole Bryce Huff extension. I know that came out in one of the hit pieces. I believe it was the first one that came out. Maybe it was the second one. I don't know. There's been so many, I lose count. But either way, what Joe Douglas did to this offensive line, or this defensive line rather, and really, I mean, he rebuilt the offensive line, and he made one of the weaknesses of the team a strength, and then took the team's greatest strength and made it a weakness. So he basically canceled it out, and here we are, 4-12, another lost season. But you took a defensive line in 2023 that had Quentin Jefferson, JFM, Bryce Huff, even Al Woods is a run stuffer before he tore his Achilles. On top of Jermaine Johnson, Quinnen Williams, guys like that. Will McDonald in year 1, which obviously limited number of snaps, but still played a little bit of a role. You took that unit and replaced those guys with pieces like Javon Kinlaw, Hassan Reddick, who didn't show up until 7 weeks in. Lecky Fotu has been a non-factor. He's been hurt all year. He was supposed to kind of be your run stuffer, Al Woods replacement. He's barely played. And then you let a bunch of UDFAs and Tack McKinley come in here and expect them to play a big role. Like, seriously? Bruce Hector, another name that's gotten more playing time this year. Like, these are the name. This is what has happened to this defensive line. Seriously? I mean, it's embarrassing. It's pathetic on so many levels. And it's not even just the way it happened. Or it's not even just like, it's more so how it happened, I should say. It is the way it happened. Like, you let Bryce Huff walk for nothing. You didn't even try and make him an offer. He's gone. Hassan Reddick, I mean, it was a disaster. Right? Javon Kinlaw hasn't even played well. But it's not even just that. It's also JFM. I mean, JFM, you traded away for nothing. A good locker room guy. Could play inside. Could play outside. You dealt him for nothing. For nothing. And then Quentin Jefferson. Okay, he walks. Even that, though, was so complicated. The Jets got a chance to match the Browns' offer. And, like, Douglas just didn't know, or he didn't. I guess they called him and the Jets never got back to them, or it took him too late to get back to the Browns. And then he just signed with them. And then he got released by Cleveland. The Jets had a chance middle of the year this year, when they were still, I guess, mathematically in it, to pick him up and help this defensive line. And what do? Bills claim him and he goes to a division rival. So you let Quentin Jefferson go, and how that happened was weird. You didn't get back to the Browns. JFM, you traded away for nothing. You didn't even barely make an attempt to keep Bryce Huff your long-term. You should have extended him last year before we even got to this point this past offseason. It's disgusting what happened to this defensive line. And then you get more playing time out of guys like Michael Clemens, Javon Kinlaw, Hassan Reddick. Just a bunch of unlikable players that don't do anything to impact the game in a positive way. A once great unit, a once top 5 elite unit has now turned into one of the worst units in the NFL. Now, the one silver lining to this is, look, you still have Quinnen Williams. You do have a couple core pieces. You've got Quinnen Williams. Will McDonald's taking a massive year 2 jump, and Jermaine Johnson will be back coming off the torn Achilles. So those are like your 3 foundational pieces on this defensive line. Maybe Leonard Taylor has done enough. He's done some things. Maybe Leonard Taylor's like a rotational piece. He can't be playing as much as he is now, but is he maybe a rotational piece moving forward? Okay, but you need to completely revamp. Ideally, another edge rusher, and you need a lot of help around Quinnen Williams because it's just too easy for teams to take Quinnen Williams out of the game when the guys that are next to Quinnen are guys like Solomon Thomas, guys like Leonard Taylor, guys like Javon Kinlaw, Michael Clemens. I mean, you need to completely revamp, and I know Clemens more plays the outside, but you just need to completely revamp the interior of that room. So you got some options. Obviously, the draft, there's a good chance the Jets go defense in the draft. We'll see. That'll ultimately be up to the new GM, new regime, how they evaluate this roster, where they want to go in the first round. But there's a lot of talent in the top of this first round defensively. You want to go Abdul Carter out of Penn State. He's an option, potential top 10 pick. You want to go Mason Graham. I think he would be ideal just because Abdul is on the outside, Mason Graham interior. So you have Quinnen pairing up with Mason Graham. I would certainly, a guy in his prime and then a young rookie that can learn from him, and you can build those two guys next to each other long term. I think that would be positive. So Mason Graham's an option. You've also got Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham's teammate at Michigan. A late first round, early day 2 option. Abdul Carter, Mason Graham probably off the board top 10. If the Jets wait, maybe you have Kenneth Grant day 2. We'll see. Obviously, a lot of this still happen in the draft process. It's still very early. Combine, Senior Bowl, all that stuff. And you know how it is. Every year there's surprise guys that skyrocket up the boards. Guys drop. We all know how it goes. So lots still has to happen. But as we sit here January 1st, those are kind of the top names. You got to figure it out. Revamp this defensive line. You have Quinnen, you have Will McDonald, you have JJ. Kinlaw's gone. Reddick's not coming back. Fotu's not coming back. You got to get rid of Clemens. I know he's got another year left, but move on from him. Just release him. Get rid of him. Or if you can get something back for him, which you probably won't, even if it's, just get rid of him. And, bring in a Mason Graham, let's say, pair him next Quinnen Williams, and then your starting rotation, starting defensive line that year is from the outside in is McDonald, Quinnen, Graham, JJ, and then fill in some depth pieces, maybe get some veterans. But you got to revamp this defensive line because it's embarrassing what's happening to it. So that's New Year's resolution number 3. Number 4, it's rebuilding the safety position. For a while now, really under Robert Saleh, and the Jets overall have never sold very high on safety. They never have, especially under Saleh, especially under Douglas. It was a lot of one-year rentals. It was a lot of guys that are probably rotational pieces on other teams that came here to start. I also think the Jets corners played a big role in the Jets safeties not always needing to be the top of the line players because the corners oftentimes would just take care of business in the secondary, and they kind of covered up a lot of the safeties problems. But the rentals like Jordan Whitehead, who may be looking back on it wasn't that bad after all, but like the Jordan Whiteheads of the world, the LaMarcus Joyners, even Chuck Clark, like the Jets need to completely gut the safety position. And I can make the same case too. The tight end, they need to completely rebuild as well. But the safety room, to me, I think the Jets could potentially get away with re-signing Conklin for another year. You look at the safety position, it's gotten so rotten. You just need to completely gut it. You need to completely change it, completely revamp it. And I do think, and again, this will a lot have to do with the next head coach, the next general manager. But to me, I think the Jets potentially here could go out and maybe sell a little bit higher on a safety, spend a little bit more on a premier safety or somebody like that. Maybe make a trade. I know safety's not a premium position, and the Jets obviously have, and it's more important to rebuild the defensive line. And of course, there's a lot of other major decisions that are facing this team. But the days of like Tony Adams going out there and starting, like Ashton Davis, Chuck Clark, right? We talked about Whitehead, LaMarcus Joyner. I mean, even Jarius Monroe, who they just signed to the active roster. Like those guys, it's over. Like even Isaiah Oliver, I know he's been a depth piece, and I know he's, a guy that is kind of can play everywhere, but you just need bigger names than this. You need more talented guys than this. Like you can't, these 1 year contract, these 1 year rentals just aren't going to cut it. And I know Oliver's back for another, or Oliver will be a free agent rather. He's only got a 1 year deal. The Jets will need to change that safety. Like you look at a lot of them. Ashton Davis is going to be a free agent. Tony Adams is going to have 1 year left. Chuck Clark's going to be a free agent, and Isaiah Oliver is going to be a free agent. So the only really returning safety right now would be Tony Adams. So you need to completely gut that room. Like move on from these guys, potentially bring in a couple, some bigger names, potentially spend a little bit more money on that room. Because it's just not cutting it right now. I mean, you got Woody Johnson telling him to bench Tony Adams for whatever reason. It's just not good enough. It's not good enough. It's for the last couple years, it's been able to get by, but this year it's gotten ugly. Like just you got an older guy in Chuck Clark. Ashton Davis really is a borderline NFL player. I mean, Tony Adams is a depth piece at best, and these guys are playing big roles for your defense. That can't happen. So you've got to completely revamp the safety position, in my opinion, here in 2025. And look, you want to look at some of the free agent options, right? You've got Justin Simmons potentially. Do you go out and maybe spend high and bring him in? I feel like he's been linked to the Jets now the last couple years. Justin Reed could be an option. Tyrann Mathieu, I know he's older, but he could be an option. Like those are just some of the free agents that you could potentially look down. But either way, you've got to rebuild the safety room. You've got to. 22, you can't go out there week 1 next year and your safety room be Tony Adams and like Ashton Davis again and some washed up old veteran as depth and I don't know, like Isaiah Oliver as your do-it-all guy. You just can't do that. Like, no, you can't have that. Even Jalen Mills, I like him a lot. And I think also that says a lot about this team. Maybe you bring Jalen Mills back as the depth, but like Jalen Mills was playing big snaps for this team. Like I think that's all you need to know about where the safety room's at. Jalen Mills, who came in mid-season, turned into maybe this team's best safety. I think that tells you a lot about the guys that are currently here. Tony Adams isn't bad, but he shouldn't be a starter. He shouldn't be playing every single week the amount he's playing. He's more of a depth guy at best. The Jets have a bunch of depth guys starting at safety. That needs to change. It needs to be gutted. So that's New Year's resolution number 4. Number 5 is an interesting one. I could have went a couple different areas. I could have even maybe put 6 New Year's resolutions on this list, but I kind of wanted to make it a normal number. Just go with 5. I could have went tight end. Like I said, tight end is definitely a position that the New York Jets need to figure out. Tyler Conklin, Jeremy Ruckert, 2 guys that haven't had very good seasons. Kenny Yeboah is, he is what he is. He's not a long-term plan. He's a practice squad, sometimes active on game day guy at best. So you could go tight end. You want to go Tyler Warren out of Penn State, fine. But I could see a world where maybe the Jets bring Conklin back in like a 1-year deal. I mean, he is the furthest thing from this team's biggest problems. But I'm going to go a little bit different way. We've already talked about rebuilding safety. We've talked about rebuilding the defensive line. Instead of talking about rebuilding another position, I'm going to go a different New Year's resolution here, number 5. Could have went a couple different areas, but I'm going to say utilize Breece Hall properly here as my final, but certainly not least, New Year's resolution in 2025 for the New York Jets. All right, Breece Hall is a stud. We all know it. He does things, it's been a bumpy year for him. He's had some moments this year. He's had some flashes. He's been up and down. It seems like he's been dealing with some injuries. I don't know how much of, he was dealing with a lower body injury in training camp. If you remember, even all the way back to OTAs, I don't know if any of that has a lingering effect on what's happened this year. It obviously hasn't been the season any of us expected for Breece Hall. I mean, we went into the year, I'll openly admit, I was completely wrong about, I think we were all completely wrong about this team as a whole in 2024, but we were also completely wrong, I think, about Breece Hall. A lot of us saw him coming into the season, smashing 1,000 yards, smashing 2,000 all-purpose yards. I mean, this was a guy that seemed like he was primed for a massive year, and it just hasn't happened. 197 carries, 819 yards, 4.2 yards per carry, 5 touchdowns. He's had 54 receptions for 468 yards, 8.7 yards per reception, and 2 touchdowns. And you look at him overall, 251 total touches, 1,287 yards, 5.1 yards per attempt, and 7 touchdowns. Those are all well below where he was at last year. I mean, you just look at his numbers last year, right? 76 receptions for 591 yards. He's not even going to sniff that this year. And then rushing-wise, 223 carries for 994 yards last year. He's not going to get that either. Bearing some crazy game on Sunday, he's not even going to sniff the touches, and he's not going to sniff the yards. There's a good chance he doesn't even hit over 900 yards this year rushing, which if you would have told us that in the beginning of the season, and if you would have told me he would have played 16 games and not hit it, I would have been surprised. But I think a lot of what Breece Hall has been is the coaching and the way the offense is structured. That's been it to me. I think more of Breece Hall's struggles have been coaching and not utilizing him properly. I also think some of it's been where the Jets are at in games, more so than himself. This is a guy that's here that the most carries he's had in a game this year is 18. That was week 6 against Buffalo. That was also the same game where he had 113 yards, the most he's had in a game this year. You look at his previous season highs and carries. He had 20 in 2022 was his most he had in a game. 37 last year was the most he had in the game, which was the final week against New England when Robert Saleh just kept running him. And an 18 this year. There's a good chance he doesn't even hit 20 carries once this season, which is pathetic on so many levels and simply inexcusable. Inexcusable for a guy of that level of talent, that much ability from a rushing perspective to get into the open field and make plays happen, to only have 18 carries as your most in a season and only average 13 carries per game this year is on the coaching more so. You know, again, I get it. There's been some times this season where the Jets have been losing in games and they've had to come back, but they've also been in a lot of close games. And there have also been some games where the Jets have gone away from the run, right? I always go to that New England game. Early in that game, Breece Hall, they were getting the ball a ton. And he was running really well. Looked good. 5 yards a carry. They were moving the ball. Patriots defense had no answers. And then they decided to get away from the run, and they lost the game. I mean, there's been a couple examples of that this season, where early in games, the scripted plays, they would run, it goes well, and then they would get away from it, and they would, passing while they do blow the game. You know, the offense would stall. I mean, think about the coaching Breece Hall's had. It's been awful. It's been awful. Terrible coaching. He's also had back-to-back years where the offensive line was a mess. This year, it's finally good, but the coaching's still a major problem. I mean, his offensive coordinator for the longest time, Nathaniel Hackett, before the change to Todd Downing, didn't know he was much of a threat in the passing game last year until that Giant game. It's crazy to me, Breece Hall, at the level of talent that he has yet to have 20 carries in a game this year. It's crazy. And it's another example of how this team has kind of just turned into the Aaron Rodgers, do whatever the heck you want show during games, where he just drops back and is just throwing it 35, 40 times at this point, which was never supposed to be what this season was supposed to be. This was still supposed to be a run-first team that finally had a quarterback that can make all the throws. But instead, it's turned into a quarterback that's pretty washed up, a quarterback that is just forcing it to his buddies, and a run game that they just don't know how to utilize. So I think New Year's resolution, new offensive staff, new coaching staff that comes in here, you've got to utilize Breece Hall more. This team has got to get back to getting him the ball a ton. He's got to be their CMC. He's got to be your do-it-all guy. I mean, even in the receiving game, he's been a non-factor. I mean, there's been times where he's open and Rodgers elects for, I mean, last week he was open for a first down. Just throw it to him there. And what does Rodgers do? He throws it to Kenny Yeboah and throws it at his ankles. It's inexcusable. And really, Brees's whole career. I mean, 2022, he averaged 11 carries per game. 2023 was 13 carries per game. This year's 13 carries per game. Even in his whole career, he's averaged 13 carries per game in his first 3 seasons, and 11 in 2022. I mean, they've never used him properly. They never have utilized him properly. In 2024, they don't have an identity. This team does not have an identity. This offense does not have an identity. The offense's identity was supposed to be kind of go through Breece Hall, was supposed to be the identity of this offense, but it isn't. And that needs to change. So that's my final New Year's resolution. So once again, 5 New York Jets New Year's resolutions to have success in 2025. Find the right coach, general manager, extend Garrett Wilson, rebuild the D-line, rebuild the safety position, and utilize Breece Hall properly. Because the way they've utilized Breece Hall in his first 3 years, especially this season, is simply inexcusable. And that needs to change. A player of his talent should have a whole lot more carries per game than he does. And a game plan should be centered a whole lot more around him than it's been. And that, again, trickles down to the coaching and the new staff that comes in. All right, so another episode in the books. Comment down below, what are your thoughts on these 5 New York Jets New Year's resolutions? Agree with them, disagree? You have any more? Like I said, tight end, certainly rebuild that position. Quarterback, you want to say New Year's resolution, it would be best for the Jets to stay with Rodgers, move on from Rodgers, fine. I wasn't going to quite go down that road in this episode. I kind of wanted to change things up a little bit, not so much talk a ton about Rodgers and all that stuff. Again, you know where I stand on that. I don't want him back, but at the end of the day, it should be up to the new GM and the new head coach, whoever that might be, to make that decision. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So let me know what you think in the comments section down below. What are your New Year's resolutions for the New York Jets? Stay tuned. We'll have a lot more content coming your way. As always, JETS, 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 Jets. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to please like and subscribe for those tuning in on YouTube, and we'll see you soon.